Because I'm a rich person. I'm not going to fight. Rich people don't go to war, right? Rich people get poor people to go to war for them, whether it's in 1860 or whether it's during the 1960s or whether it's today, right? Rich folks get doctors to write notes for them that say that they have heel spurs, and that's why they can't go to Vietnam. And if you don't know who I'm talking about, you can Google that shit because he's sitting in the White House right now, right? Oh, I can't go fight. I have heel spurs. Send some poor kids to do that for me, please, right? So that's been a long-standing tradition. So the rich have to figure out a way to convince the poor to go fight for them. But that's a hard thing. That's like a hard sell, right? Like, how the hell, why would you do that? Why would you go fight to protect my property rights when you don't own anything? The only way you would do it is if that rich person comes to you and says, hey, listen, you gotta go fight because we gotta maintain our way of life, because if these people get free, they're gonna take your jobs. No, fool, they already got your job. That's how it works, right? Because if I'm white and I gotta charge you $1 a day to work on the farm, but you can get a black person to do it for nothing because you own them, guess who got the job? Free got the job. Right? So in a sense, poor white folks would have been better off joining with black folks to overthrow the slave system. That would have raised the wage floor of all working people. But they got tricked by rich white men telling them that their enemies were black and brown. If you don't understand the history of law enforcement misconduct in black space, in black communities, Black Lives Matter won't make any sense to you. Now, I want to be very clear when I talk about the history of law enforcement misconduct. I'm not talking about every damn cop. I'm not talking about good cops and bad cops, good people and bad people. I'm talking about a history and a culture of law enforcement that has simply not treated black and brown peoples the same as white folks. And anyone who denies that what I just said is true has not studied history and is not competent to speak about it, right? Because the history of policing traces directly back to slave patrols. That was the first iteration of law enforcement on this land in any real formal sense. It was police, after all, who enforced the slave codes. It was police who enforced segregation after slavery was ended. It was police who conspired to engage in lynchings of thousands of black bodies, releasing suspected criminals or people who weren't even suspected of a crime into the hands of the mob. It was police that pulled protesters off of sit-in stools in the 1960s. It was police that turned water cannons and dogs on children in the streets of Birmingham. It was police that did the same and beat protesters on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. It was cops, along with uniformed military personnel, that rampaged in Mexican-American communities in Los Angeles during the Zoot Suit riots in 1943. That was law enforcement. It wasn't just average people. It was people whose job was to, quote-unquote, enforce the law. The problem is, if you live in a society where the laws are unjust, everyone who enforces those laws is engaged in injustice, by definition, you see? My part of the country, right, actually announced that the reason they wanted to break away from the Union and possibly go to war with their brothers and sisters to the north was in order to maintain slavery and white supremacy. They said that at the time. We lie about it now. And we say it had nothing to do with that. But of course, at the time, they didn't have any shame about it, so they just said it openly. Right? The vice president of the Confederacy, Alexander Stephens, said that the cornerstone of the new government was the great truth that the Negro was not the equal of the white man. So that's the reason the Confederacy was formed and existed. Let's remember, during the colonial period, mid-1600s, there was no such thing as white people. I know some people who are now called white find that shocking, right? Because they think whiteness is real, right? But whiteness was created. Europeans didn't call themselves white. We didn't call ourselves white. We weren't all members of one big happy family. Are you kidding? Have you studied the history of Europe? The history of Europe was about killing each other. That's what we did in Europe. We just killed each other before we figured out there were other people to kill. We just killed each other, right? I mean, that was the history of Europe. The English hated the Irish, right? Northern Italians didn't even think that Southern Italians were Italians. The Germans hated everybody, and everybody hated their ass right back, right? There was no team called white, no race called white, but all of a sudden, in the middle of the 1600s, there was. Why? Why was it suddenly necessary to create this thing called the white race? Well, because rich people can count, that's why. And so rich folks looked around, the ones that owned all the land, you know, in the colonies, the colonial elite, looked around and they realized something, that they were heavily outnumbered by African enslaved folks, by European indentured servants, who were just one level above a slave, or other Europeans who weren't technically indentured servants, but they were still peasants, didn't have any money, didn't have any land, and they could do the math. They added it up, and they were like, damn, we got to figure out a way to split these folks apart from one another, or they're going to rise up and take our stuff, right? Because after a while, these black folks who were enslaved Africans and these quote unquote white folks who were poor Europeans are going to figure out they're all getting played by these rich people, right? So ultimately, the rich figure out they got to come up with some way to get somebody in that group on their team. The easiest thing is to get the poor Europeans, right? Because at least they look like you. They sort of share some of the customs and the culture. So they all of a sudden create this thing called whiteness, and they say, now you're part of the club. Now we're going to let you testify in court, enter into contracts, vote, at least if you're a man, own a little bit of land, at least if you're a man, right? And we're going to get rid of indentured servitude. No more of that, because you're too good for that. And we're going to take the white men, now called white men, and put them on the slave patrol to keep black people in line. Give them a horse and a gun and a badge and make them feel big and powerful, right? They're still poor. They still don't have anything. They didn't pay the slave patrol well, right? Just exploited them, used them as a buffer between the elite and the other poor folks, particularly poor folks of color. And pretty soon, the rebellions that occasionally happened where black and white got together to overthrow the elite, those stopped, right? But this kid was screaming it, and he says, I can't find a job. Oh, Jesus, I can't find a job because black and Mexican folks took them all. Really? Blacks and Mexicans took all the jobs, all of them? Right? Then how is it that black folks and Latino folks are significantly more likely than white folks to be out of work? If that were true, why is it that black folks with a college degree are twice as likely as whites with a degree to be out of work? Latino folk with a degree, 50% more likely than white folks with a degree to be out of work. Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders with a degree, 23% more likely than whites with a degree to be out of work. Our indigenous brothers and sisters with a degree, 2/3 more likely than whites with a degree to be out of work. So I don't know where these people of color are taking all these damn jobs, but I know they are not taking them far. It's like they took them a block and a half and were like, yeah, I don't like that job anymore. I'm done with it, right? But this kid was convinced that's why he couldn't find work. Now, it's sort of ironic, though, because like the next paragraph is the paragraph where he told me that blacks and Mexicans are all lazy. All right, which is it? Because it can't be both, right? Because like if you took all the jobs, I'm pretty sure you're the opposite of lazy. That takes a lot of energy, running around from job to damn job. You can't be lazy and do that. And if you are lazy, I'm pretty sure you didn't even take one job, let alone all the damn jobs. I have this image in my head, did all that in 18 months, destroyed the economy. There wasn't a Mexican person in the room, documented or not, right? There wasn't a black person within 50 yards of any of them, right? There were no Asian Americans, no indigenous people, very few, if any, Muslims in the room. It was just white, probably, just dudes that just real smart, and so smart that they lost all that money or stole it or squandered it. And I know people get very uptight when I mention that they were white. Sometimes people are like, why do you have to point out that they were white? That's sort of racist. No, it's descriptive, right? And if they had all been black and brown, somebody would have pointed that shit out. Like if it was all black people and all Mexicans, I'm really confident that somebody would have said, no more banking jobs for blacks and Mexicans, right? If black folks had lost all that money, $12.5 trillion, I guarantee you no bank would have hired a black person for any bank job, not even like a teller job ever again. That would have been it. But white guys destroy the economy and they keep getting bonuses. How does that happen, right? Because we're blaming the wrong people.